Welcome to Mystery of the Soul. I'm your co-host, and I'm joined today by Leo, who is a psychic medium. Our podcast explores the depths of the soul, the spiritual, and the supernatural.
Hi, Erin.
Hi, Leo. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm good. Hanging in there. You have a little bit of a
Good.
cold, huh?
I do. I'm kind of on the other side of it now, recovering.
Yeah. It's that time of year. I think everyone's getting sick, right?
It is, yeah, with the weather changes, the temperatures, and running your heat and all that stuff.
Yeah, I know. It's a real bummer. I had something myself a couple weeks ago. I'm just getting through it. So, so Abby couldn't join us today. She too is under the weather, which is unfortunate, but she's resting in bed, so we want her to stay there, resting in bed.
Which is what she needs to be doing.
Yeah, she needs to be doing a lot of that for sure. I do have a funny Abby story before we get into our topic today. Can I tell you?
Yeah.
Okay. So because she's not been well, we were in the hospital for a couple days and I was hanging out with her. And this hospital plays music every time a baby is born. And it's the same music regardless of the gender, but every time the music would play, I'd see Abby sort of wake up and look over at me and she'd be like, girl, 7 ounces. Music would play again a couple more hours. She'd be like, a boy, small, 6 ounces. And then she'd go back to sleep.
That's funny.
So that was kind of a fun little game that she was playing to keep herself busy. Yeah. All right. So today we're talking about, I guess, what we would call connected souls, right? Because we talked about an awakening soul in our first soul series episode. So we have a series that you and I are doing where we just explore the depths of the soul. Our second episode of Mott's Altogether was around spiritual awakening, so awakening soul. This episode, you and I are going to talk a little bit about a soul who's already connected and plugged in, right?
Right. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a couple questions I'm going to fire off and ask you. And then as usual, I'm going to invite your guides to join us in the chat because sometimes they like to pop in and share some wisdom, right?
Yeah. They're here and ready to go.
Yeah. All right. So if we're using the phrase connected soul, what is the soul connected to? What's the bigger picture? Like, is it heaven? Is it God? Is it a collective? Like, if we are already online as a soul, what are we plugging into?
I think I'm going to use the analogy that I think before we hit record that I was referring to earlier about the collective sort of being like the internet. You know, we can't really see the internet. You can't really touch it, but we're all plugged in.
Yep.
And so, you know, I think when, let's say, we're waking up, I think, you know, maybe our connection to the internet is maybe clearer or stronger, or, you know, I don't know if you want to compare it to, like, if you remember, like, dial-up modems years ago, and then you have like Fios connection, right? Much stronger, wider bandwidth, more information coming through. And then I think it's kind of like, you know, when you've got an older laptop that's kind of, it's put in its time, but it's not processing that fast. And so I think as we're waking up, we're realizing we need maybe more information and maybe the ability to kind of get that information easier and maybe quicker. And so we kind of upgrade our laptops to upgrade our connection. And we do the same things with like our cell phones, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. It's a great way to describe it.
So it's kind of like, if you have like Verizon's a carrier, AT&T's a carrier, right? And we're all connected to like one or two of three of these big, giants that run all the cellular service, right? But I guess another interesting question would be, even though Verizon has like a set number of, towers, AT&T has their own proprietary ones, like, where's that all connected to?
Yeah. So we would say then that that's all connected to spirit, source.
I think source.
Okay.
I think source. I think that's the big question that people maybe in even just different religions
Mm-hmm.
are wondering, trying to figure out, like, where did everything come from? How did we get here?
Yeah. I saw on the internet, and I wish I could remember whose piece of content it was, but I thought it was a really beautiful illustration of soul versus source. And if you would
Mm-hmm.
imagine a big circle filled with a color, let's just call it pink,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Big pink
Yeah.
circle. And then inside that circle are a bunch of smaller circles. And those circles aren't filled with anything. They're also pink. And what that
Okay.
image illustrated with the pinkest source, our souls are those circles, but because they're also pink, it represents that like we're still part of something bigger, even though our soul might be carved out in a little bit of a circle. And it was meant to illustrate a connectedness to something bigger. And I thought it was just such a simple way of being like, oh, okay, got it. I'm that circle, but I'm also source.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think in the past we've talked about it, and I also use the analogy of the ocean and being like a drop in the ocean, but also part of the ocean, and the ocean is in a drop, etc. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When I have a question for you, when we think about, if we go back to your like computer analogy and your connection,
Mm-hmm.
would it be fair to say that some people like you who are psychic mediums, shamans, otherwise hyper spiritually connected, that you guys are on like a slightly faster hookup? Would that be a fair analogy?
I'm trying to think how to answer that. I think, we're at a different processing speed, definitely. And our platform is different. But, if we look at everybody, I guess we can use electronics, but if we look at each other and let's say we're either our smartphone, for example, or our laptop, um, they have the different operating systems, but then, have these, the example I'm getting is like the different applications that are available on, let's say, like the smartphones, whether it's iPhone or Android. It's kind of like our clair senses.
Mm.
Like they are kind of like, let's say, maybe applications that, you know the applications are out there on, either Apple or Google Play to download those to your phone. They're accessible, but whether or
Mm-hmm.
not we have them on our phone, and whether or not they're active and we're using them. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. Yes. You guys are using those apps every day.
Mm-hmm.
People like you that are,
And then some, right?
and then some. So let's talk a little bit about how it feels to be connected, right? So whether you're a psychic, whether you're an awakening soul. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already an awakening soul. But let's talk about what it feels like to be connected. How do you know that you're plugged in? How do you feel like in your day-to-day experience what does it feel like to be plugged in?
So I'll use the example that I use with my mediumship mentorship students. So how you know that you're connected, let's say if I'm comparing like psychically, like energy to energy, or if it's like the medium's connected to spirit,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of feels like it's almost like a high feeling, like a runner's high, or it has sort of like a euphoric feeling to it, like it's a little floaty when you're
Mm-hmm.
connected, and you're less grounded because your vibration's higher. You have to get your vibration higher to connect with spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that is spirit of loved ones or spirit, like our spirit guides, our team, there's a sense that when we're doing that, our vibration is higher than maybe our normal day-to-day average vibration that we're going through our day, our work day, just the mundane.
Yep. I have an
Does that make
example,
sense?
yeah, it does. I have an example too at a much smaller scale that you and I have talked about, but I think fits into this, which is the experience I had with one of my horses a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I showed up to the barn and I was walking up to the gate, and he was walking down the hill to the gate as well from inside his field. And then all of a sudden I got hit with like all of these happy tingles, and I thought it was
Oh,
weird.
right.
And
Yes.
yeah. And I was
Mm-hmm.
sort of like, oh, this is a weird experience, and then I
Mm-hmm.
went and got him.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I validated, you and I spoke about it. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what was that?
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, oh, he was happy to see you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just that feeling, that energetic connection for a quick second of him being like, hey, hi, mom.
Well, what I think we talked about, and I think how I replied to it was like, it's just kind of like that energetic bond we have with our pets.
Mm-hmm.
And you have your animals, and you're really close to your horses,
Mm-hmm.
and that's such a strong bond, and that really high vibration, tingly feeling, really good feeling that you were having, it's kind of like, I think how I replied and described it to you is, just because you love your animals love you, you were kind of having that feeling of sensing like what unconditional love feels like running through that energetic bond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty great. Um,
Yeah.
but from my limited experience for a second, that felt like being online. Like it was a different experience than like your day to day grocery shopping, whatever else you're doing in your life, right? So
Well, it's
let's
kind
talk a
of
little.
like, oh, go ahead.
Nope, please go.
I was just going to say, it's kind of like we're kind of walking around, kind of like let's say like a Wi-Fi router, or at least like that router is picking up the signal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, as long as the router's plugged in, it's constantly searching for a signal, and when the signal comes through, it picks it up.
That's such a creative analogy. I think that's it. That's it, right? That's such a simple way of
Okay.
putting it. Um, where I was going to go is sort of the undercurrent to all of this energetic connection, which is a sense of belief and knowing, right? And that, like, you almost,
Mm-hmm.
that precedes some of that energy feeling, because you have to believe that it's possible, right?
Well, and I think the more examples you have of it, and the more you trust it and you get some validation, the more you believe it, and the more you're more likely to trust it.
Yep. Yep. Okay, so we talked a little bit about connected souls, a little bit about what it feels like to be connected. Should we go to the topic of like reincarnated souls? That's an interesting one,
We
right?
can.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Your student, one of your students, you were telling me this was a couple weeks ago, had a really interesting question about reincarnation. Um, and actually, let's not assume that everyone knows what reincarnation is. So maybe the first step is, will you define reincarnation for our listeners? And then would you pick up and share with us that question your student had about reincarnation?
Yeah, so I'll try to simplify it, like reincarnation, the idea behind it, and there's different beliefs whether people believe in it or not, but it's kind of like our soul, I guess. I don't know if I want to use this word, but I feel like this is the word I want to use, is kind of recycles, a new form, whether it's, one lifetime you're a male, the next lifetime you're a female, maybe the next lifetime you're a farmer, maybe the next lifetime you're a cop,
Mm-hmm.
or the next lifetime you're someone's daughter or you're someone's son.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to reincarnation, I think the belief out there that I've heard, and I think it makes sense, that, I think people have had the question, well, can animals reincarnate into humans, or can humans reincarnate into animals? And I think they usually stick with their own species. So I think
Mm-hmm.
animals can kind of reincarnate, so like a dog that passed, could reincarnate into a new dog that came into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yep.
And so the question, if I'm remembering right, it was actually a question I got in a group reading event that I was out doing,
Ah,
and
okay.
I think the question was, if a soul is reincarnated, are we able to connect with that previous soul still?
Yeah, it's a
And
great
so
question.
the answer that I got from my guides was that we were talking earlier about, like, our souls being part of a collective, and how I understand it, or at least how my guides explained it, was even if, let's say, we have our soul that's connected to the collective, there's an aspect of our soul that's always with the collective, and then there's an aspect of the soul that's incarnated here. And so, because the aspect that is still in the collective still carries that lifetime, and so that's how, yes, if someone is reincarnated, we could still connect with that other lifetime.
I think that just further illustrates that image of little circles within a big circle, all the same color, right?
Like you were
Because,
saying, yeah.
yeah, we're all still connected. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we can access that source. I thought that was such a fascinating uh, question to ask because if reincarnation is real and someone reincarnates, can you still connect energetically with
Mm-hmm.
that soul or that person who embodied that soul way
Yeah, it's kind
back?
of a logical question, because people might think, well, how can you do that? Because, like, if they've reincarnated, aren't they gone?
Right. I've heard a lot about the idea that Earth is kind of where souls go for growth. Earth is
Mm-hmm.
like school for souls, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
Like we kind of pick coming here because the opportunities to grow and reach
Mm-hmm.
our higher selves are accelerated in this kind of environment. Have you
Mm-hmm.
heard that yourself? And if you have, would you talk a little bit about your take on Earth being school for souls?
Yeah, well, I think I'll talk about it, but I want to reference actually the movie I think both you and I have seen by Pixar, Soul, right?
Yeah.
they do a really good job with showing, kind of like the setting is like all these souls in sort of a collective and deciding where do they want to go, and then what's going to be their mission, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
who do they want to be their parents, etc., and what kind of experiences do they want to have in life. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like they do a really good job with that, and I think it's a good family film. I think it's simple that younger kids can understand it, and it's a good, I think, um I guess, a good learning opportunity to like answer some questions about, you know, what's out there, and what happens when little kids are wondering, what happens when someone dies, or how do we get here, kind of thing. But I do believe, like a lot of people, that we there is a plan when we incarnate here, and when we're born, most of the time we're not awake to the plan because we're sort of born with that amnesia. But there's so many different situations in life that people can go through, either as children, adults, animals, but we'll stick with adults, or I mean people in general for a second. There's situations that are like horrible that people go through, and to think about someone planning on putting themselves through that, that's like a really hard pill to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might be hard for someone to kind of wrap their head around. And, why would someone choose that? Why would someone choose a harder life? Why would someone choose an easier life? It's kind of, I think, has to do with, I guess, like the age of the soul, because we've talked about, like, I don't know if it's going to be part of this episode or not, but like what is like an old soul? Um, I think we're going to get to that, but I can talk about it now. It's just kind of like a
Yeah.
soul, an old soul that people refer to a lot of times. People will look at their children, or people will refer to like a lot of kids that are younger as like, oh, they're kind of an old soul. And it's kind of like, they've been here before, they've done this before. It's kind of like you can just tell that they get it, and you don't have to, like, they just, I don't know, they have an understanding that kind of you don't have to explain necessarily to them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. You see it, like the younger the person is, you would kind of say they're wise beyond their years. You see like an
Right.
emotional maturity in someone that is atypical for their age or their life
Right.
experiences. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
that ease with which they go through life seems contrary to their age, right? So you wouldn't call
Mm-hmm.
someone
Mm-hmm.
who's on the upper end of the lifespan an old soul
Right. You wouldn't
necessarily.
call someone in their 70s an old soul.
Right. Right. You could, but I think
You
that
could,
term
but
comes up more
it
often in
doesn't.
younger people.
Right, right, because it's not expected.
Right. Right. Um, yeah. And so that's definitely a sign of a soul who's reincarnated before, and that person is recognizing those experiences, and even intuitively, right? Like they don't know. Some people do. Most people have amnesia and don't necessarily walk around remembering all of their past life experiences and like consciously recognizing, oh yeah, I did this 100 years ago when I was XYZ, right?
Mm-hmm.
but they carry in their DNA, in their soul, whatever you want to call it, the experience from that past. And that gives them the wisdom to move forward with a little bit more grace and acceptance in this lifetime. That's my
Yeah,
take.
I'd say so. Yeah. And it's interesting, like, to go back to the reincarnation for a second, is like, I don't have the names of the books and stuff, but there is a lot of research out there that has been done with kids that are recalling or that have recalled past lives, and they've come through and they just know things and they've been able to validate things for people. I believe there's, if you go on to the internet, and I think you can probably search there's, I think, books out there that talk about these type of situations with like these kids that are recalling past lifetimes, that how would they know this? But when they talk about it, and then there was some research done, it's actually validated, wow, that actually happened, and this person was actually this person, and they did this and they did that, and right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can pull some of those up in the show notes for the listeners too. So when you guys are
Mm-hmm.
listening to this, just check out our show notes or check out our Instagram. I'm sure we'll have these books pulled up and referenced for you so you could take a look at it. But that's like an excellent example of reincarnation, is because I've heard of those stories as well. Little kids that just remember these things from a past life. That, yeah, it's been
Mm-hmm.
validated. It's crazy. So when we were talking about Earth as like a school for growth,
Mm-hmm.
um, you referenced it a little bit, but we didn't use the exact phrase, which is a soul contract. And you were
Okay.
talking a little bit about, right, about like people who might, souls who choose a certain path. So I'm going to try and just
Mm-hmm.
define what I understand to be a soul contract. For the listener, there is an excellent book. And again, we'll put it on Insta and we'll put it in the show notes for you. But I'm going to bring it up right here. That is a reference for this whole thing about a soul contract. The author is Robert Schwartz, Schwartz. And he wrote this book called Your Soul's Plan. We don't, this isn't like an advertisement for his book. We don't know him. It's just a really good book that supports this conversation. And so he talks about a soul contract, which is basically like before you come to Earth, before you're born, you make some decisions alongside your spirit team about how you want your soul to evolve while you're here. And then you select certain life incidents to help your soul achieve that growth. Um, and those are the contracts that you set, right? So you pick certain things to happen in life because they will expand how your soul grows. And you pick that here on earth because you can do a lot more work a lot faster here on earth than you can get that kind of growth when you're not here, when you're not in a human body. Are you with
Mm-hmm.
me so far? Okay.
Yep.
So Leo and I have talked about this a little bit. It's kind of a tough concept to appreciate because there's a lot of suffering and a lot of challenge
Mm-hmm.
in this world. And it's sometimes hard to believe that people would choose those things. So I get conceptually that our soul has to grow. I appreciate that. And I can understand intellectually this concept of a soul contract. I think emotionally, it's a difficult one to totally accept, but
Mm-hmm.
it's absolutely worth bringing up and part of our conversation around like connected souls and souls who are online and the idea of reincarnation because it feeds into all of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Can I
Yeah.
ask you a question?
Yeah.
So, you know how I know we've talked about how you have felt like you and Abby have had like a soul connection, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of goes without words, right? That you just kind of understand things or accept things just like with an innate knowing.
Yes. Um, so it's interesting because Abby and I as kids did not get along. We wanted nothing to do. one another. Like we were just totally different people. But as we got older and just matured into the people that we were, and certainly as her spirituality and her psychic abilities opened up, yeah, it just became really easy. And there were certain things, like weird things that would happen between us that I just know into like in my bones. And then she'd say it to me and I'd be like, oh, I already knew that.
You just kind of were able to accept it.
Yeah, yeah. And yes, she and I wouldn't be surprised if she and I had some sort of connection, right? An agreement to work with one another when we came here. And it took most of our lives to get to the recognition that was something we agreed to do, because as kids, like I said, we didn't really get along. But now it's just locked and loaded.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think in addition to like soul contracts, like there's also a belief that like we have a soul group or a soul family that we kind of continue different lifetimes together, and we come in and out of our lifetimes together in maybe different roles sometimes. And I feel like, you know, as I've gone through life now and probably in the future, I've met people and will meet people that you just kind of feel like there's a connection that you can't explain, you know? But there's like a, I don't know, there's like a feeling or an understanding that like this like divine timing, like we talked about I think in our first episode, like the timing of when we met was, there was a reason for it, and that was probably part of the plan for, you know, this person, for us to cross paths at a certain time because of XYZ was going to be happening going forward from here.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yep.
so I have a lot of I call my soul family, where I have a lot of soul sisters and brothers, as I call them.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. You call me and Abby soul sisters too, right? And you
Yeah.
mean it like we were connected, but you also mean it like Abby and I made an agreement.
Or even like you would, I would consider you like one of my soul sisters, or like Abby like one of my soul sisters.
Yeah. Because there's a good chance we contracted before we came down here.
It definitely feels that way, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, an example of me knowing with Abby for our listeners is somewhat simple, but I like to read and write. I have a career in communications, so those skills come naturally to me. They don't come naturally to Abby, but as Abby's spiritual journey started to progress and she wanted to talk more about it, she leaned on me to help tell her story, right? To get her website up and running, to support her with this endeavor. And as you can tell, I'm still doing it even when she's not here. And what that means is, like, in my soul, in my heart, I just sort of knew, yeah, that's part of my job, right? Is to help tell this really amazing story for her, right? Particularly when she can't, if she's not feeling well, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that came as no surprise to me. I was just like, yeah, totally. That's what we're going to do. Got it.
It's like you're kind of an extension of Abby.
Yep. Yep. We don't have to get into it in great detail because at some point we're going to do probably a mega episode on animals and animal souls.
Right. Probably. Sure.
Yes. It's going to be like a 3-hour long. But it's worth making a reference here, and I'll put this again in the show notes and on Insta for our listeners, that there is discussion out there about animal soul contracts and the contracts they make with people right before they come here. And that sort of recognition.
You've been reading something, right?
Yeah. And the book is called The Animal Soul Contract. And I'll, again, put it in the show notes. And it's beautiful. And if you're an animal lover, and just a trigger warning, if you're an animal lover and you're currently grieving an animal, it's hard, because it talks about a lot of loss of an animal as part of that storyline. But It is a beautiful way to think about the growth that both humans and animals have to do while they're here on Earth. And it's a really fascinating way of looking at animals as part of our soul group, helping us with that growth and us helping them. So I recommend it to anyone who is an animal lover and interested in learning more about this topic, about soul growth, soul contracts, soul families, etc. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. All right, so we already talked about old souls. Is there anything else on like the topic of connected souls, old souls, reincarnation that we should hit on?
I'm just listening.
Yeah, so for our audience, Leo is plugging in with his team, and sometimes that takes a minute.
Yeah, they're either going to tell me, yep, it's this, or it'll be a little quiet. I don't feel like right now, but I feel like they'll jump in if we get close to something that they want to talk about.
They tend to do that.
They do. Yep.
Yes. Okay, good. Are we ready to close out this discussion then and move on to feed our soul, feed your soul?
Yeah, we could absolutely do that.
Okay. So for our listeners, Leo has done the first two portions of Feed Your Soul, which is where we end our episode with something for the listener that's truly for you. So sometimes it might be a meditation, sometimes we'll pull an oracle card, it could be anything else. But we just want to leave you with something to think about, right? Something to work on. So I am going to pull the oracle card tonight.
Right.
I know. And this is from my oracle deck. Is by an angel communicator, an amazing guy named Kyle Gray, Gray. If you have not heard of Kyle Gray, you need to go find him. He's based in the UK. He does a lot of angelic work, communication. He's just wonderful. I don't know him personally. I've just followed him for years. And he has an oracle card deck called Angels and Ancestors, which I've been using for, 6 months, 8 months now.
It's funny. That's a deck that I've looked at for quite a few years off and on, and I never got.
Yeah.
But maybe I didn't need to because you have it.
Yeah. It's just it's a beautiful deck. It's really, it was my first oracle card deck. I felt like there's definitely a reason why I picked it. But I highly recommend it. And I highly recommend you guys check out Kyle Gray if you haven't. It's Kyle Gray, Gray. Okay. I'm going to be quiet for a second, and then I'm going to pull up the card that we've got. Now I know this is for us because I've never gotten this card before. Peacekeeper.
Oh, okay.
Let go of the need to be right.
Can you describe, what the card looks like?
It looks like a Native American woman who is holding on to it looks like a sage stick almost, because you can see the smoke there. And behind her is like a buffalo. Bundle.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Peacekeeper. I'm going to look up and read this for our audience. Just give me a moment. Here it is. Peacekeeper. Let go of the need to be right. Choose peace and happiness over the need to be right. Rather than trying to prove a point, save your energy for what's important. So if we're reading this is probably a message. You always say this, Leo. Whatever we pick, we've picked because who's ever listening, this is a message that's relevant for them.
Oh, this is making sense for me already.
The Peacekeeper is a wise Native American woman who has been influenced by white buffalo woman. She holds a peace pipe, which is emblematic of surrendering the need to fight and offering harmony instead. She is a soul who knows what it's like to feel under threat and to stand up for what she believes in and what is right. Her medicine helps you take the higher road in every situation, even if you're under pressure to make a quick decision. It is a reminder that within your hands lies the power to make the right choice for all involved. You may be feeling on edge due to a stressful situation. There's a warrior within you that wants to rise up, prove your point, and get the truth across. But you're being reminded by ancestor wisdom that truth will always be revealed in the end. It's more important at this time to avoid arguments or heated discussions where you know you'll be fighting a losing battle. There is much more power in choosing to move forward from a higher perspective. This will allow you to connect deeply to the guidance within and the intuition that will lead you towards the healing of the whole situation, along with any wounds it may have inflicted on you. Choose peace. You know it's calling you. It's a really beautiful
Well, that's
message.
pretty relevant.
Yeah. I think it's relevant for us. I think it's relevant for society right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really beautiful message.
And it's not about, the message was not about being right. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Let go of being
Not
right.
being concerned about being right.
Mm-hmm. It's not always the end
and looking
goal.
at the bigger picture.
I mean, I know for myself, when I emphasize being right over peace or the longevity of a relationship, I lose something, right? I gain a lot of stress and I get angry, but I lose peace.
I just want to add something to this too.
Please.
So I think the challenge with this for some people will be is our ego is heavily involved with whether or not how easily we can do this or not.
I mean, how easily we let go of being right.
Right, because our ego likes to be right.
Is this where we'd say try and listen to what your soul would say instead of your ego?
Maybe so, or just, not think so much about proving a point, or I guess being right about something. It's not what's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make
It's
sense?
like, yeah, it does. And you're right. It's not like an easy message, right? It requires us to do
No.
some work and make some change in order to follow through what the guides are telling us, but it's very relevant.
And to go a little bit further about the ego, like that is part of our soul growth too, is just learning to coexist with our ego in a healthy way, right? Our ego is there to protect us, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to like command us,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
word came to mind. Yeah. But eventually, like as we evolve and we awaken more, we kind of are able to kind of slip into like removing all the like certain aspects of the ego that I'm trying to think of the right word that I'm looking for. I guess it's the part of the ego that what the card is saying, it's that part of the ego that wants to be right or prove a point, and it's not really what it's about.
Mm. Mm. Yep. Thinking about how that applies to me in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard not to hear that message and not automatically think about like where you're doing that in your own life right now.
Right. Where are you doing this in your personal life? Where are you doing this with yourself? Where are you doing this with your coworkers or work
Mm-hmm.
or social situations?
Yep. Well, that's definitely some food for thought. That's a very
And I
productive
think
feed your soul.
also, and I think it really, like, if we think about it as a message, when we think about all those times when we've either had arguments with someone over something that either was either important to them or important to us, and it's not about like who's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and it's
I
resonating.
think that's I think that's I think that's where it applies, is like if we can think of those situations in, I know I see this relevant for me with like my relationship with my daughter. People might see this relevant with their relationship with their partners. And I think it also has to do with like what expectations we have about situations or of other people in our
Mm-hmm.
lives. And I guess, why do we have those expectations?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is a very deep card there.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it was a coincidence. You and I both know there is no
No, I
coincidence.
don't think
Yeah.
so. No.
Yeah. It's a
All right. Do you
beautiful
have anything
card.
else on that card you want to say?
No.
All right. Do we want to close it out?
Yeah, I think we're good. But thank our listeners for joining us. We'll be back as soon as we can. Until then, have a great day and stay spiritual.